Hello and welcome to Let's Improv a Story, a podcast where I desperately try to not say Let's Improv a Podcast as the title. Today we are going to do a topic that is probably going to appear on movie screens in the not too distant future, and that is the exquisitely named Doctor Doom, the Marvel and Fantastic Four villain with a name that starts out pretty chill, Doctor, and then ends pretty wild, Doom. And first, we're going to look into what is interesting about this character. And also, first, I guess we should deal with what medium we would be making a Doctor Doom story in. Because I think if he's going to be on the screens, we shouldn't do that. We should probably just do, like a sort of aim for like a limited comic book series. The types which run from time to time, spotlighting a character in a unique story. One of the most famous of these is The Dark Knight Returns, though that's not, a story in the sort of timeline of the general Batman comics. So anyway, if we were going to pitch with the ascent of Doctor Doom to movie screens soon, there's probably going to be greater interest in him. So if we're going to pitch a limited series comic book to take advantage of that, well, I mean, you do have to find out what's interesting about this character, and especially what's interesting to you as a writer, so you can actually put some ideas and emotion and pathos, etc., into it. And certainly just if you did a 4, 5, 6 issue comic book of Doctor Doom, being a jerk again, that's not going to do much. You could do something that would perhaps parallel what happens in the movies, but movies are reshot and changed and all the time. So who knows what they'll do? They could do anything, and that's part of their iterative process. What you probably want to do is something a little different with the character. Something that would actually attract attention to the comic book. So instead, you'd want Doctor Doom in the main line. There's probably some sort of big Doctor Doom crossover or something like that. But if you're going to do a spotlight title, which again would probably set up some giant crossover, in the real world here. But I still think that you want to do something that will pop out. And that's a little riskier. And that's, a little outside of the idea of the show, where you want something that would be greenlit. But if it's something that's interesting, that still has a chance to be, published or, chosen, or however you call it, as the verb slips my mind. But first, I think it's good to look at what about Doctor Doom is interesting. Beyond one thing, he's the king of a fake country named Latveria. But he's a king, but he's a doctor. He's called Doctor Doom, not King Doom, which is interesting right there. I guess it might show you what he values, potentially, as a character. Secondly, he is this combination of technology and sorcery, which is visibly apparent in his design. He's got the technology of a sort of Iron Man armor, but wrapped in a sort of Doctor Strange cloak, though a green one. And that's interesting, the marriage of science and magic. It's an interesting take on things and lends to interesting stories and abilities, etc. He then is someone who is obsessive about power, and more so as a status effect. He wants to be more powerful than other people, seemingly so that they will value him or respect him. And there's a backstory around Doctor Doom, and this is his greatest flaw. And there's a backstory around Doctor Doom. I'll get to this in 1 second. And it's his greatest flaw, which is interesting because quite often he's very honorable. He looks kind of medieval and has a sort of medieval sense of honor. And in theory, attempts to run his country well when he's not using its resources to take over the world. But this tragic flaw of his, in theory comes from his backstory, which has developed over time, but seems to have settled on something along the lines of He came from a Romani family. His dad married a witch who practiced dark magics and essentially harnessed the power briefly of the Marvel's devil called Mephisto. Um, and I just wanted to just make Mephisto jokes. Mephisto, Eufisto, Kitfisto. Sorry. And so Doctor Doom's mom harnessed the power of Mephisto, Marvel's devil, because they gave the devil just an awesome name. And but it backfired, and I guess the Baron who ran Latveria or something, or the area, his people, caught her and killed her, and then later on, Doctor Doom's dad is hired, who is an actual doctor, not a witch and not a doctor of doom, is hired to help heal the Baron's wife, but she's too sick with cancer. His dad fails, and they have to flee. And his dad, I guess, freezes to death in the cold as he's trying to shelter young Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom, from the cold night. And so, and the resolution for the mother is, I guess, that Mephisto claims her soul as the price of her, trying to steal his powers or whatever. So Doctor Doom, in theory, or not in theory, but seemingly his backstory is this baron in the Latvian area who was, I guess, persecuting the Romani, but also, killed Doctor Doom's dad for failing to save the baron's wife. And, his dad freezes sort of his first suit of armor as his frozen father's arms around him as his father passes away. He has that experience on top of his mother dabbling in dark magic and having her soul sold and bound to Marvel's devil, Mephisto. So those are two incredibly traumatic experiences. One might be enough, but I guess with Doctor Doom, he's a very extra personality. He's got to have it all, and he's got basically two tremendously horrible backstories. And as Batman's over in the corner like, yikes, that's rough. So his backstories do lead you to his desire for power, but the issue is, I guess, perhaps from the persecution of the Romani that he experienced, his desire for power and status above others, and perhaps he sees having power, or instinctively, deep in his character, sees gaining power, whether it's over the Baron, as either revenge or to protect his father, who he was unable to do that for, or whether it's over the devil himself in order to save his mother. He could instinctively see power perhaps as a means of safety. And I don't want to be so silly to be like, this is Dr. Doom's, his safe, cozy place. He doesn't seem like the kind of character who would want to engage with that, though all of us do seek places, whether it's with a person or where you live, your home, etc., a specific room or whatever, that is, a place where we do feel protected from the world. It's not an invalid desire, of course. But, with Dr. Doom, he's not going to engage with that. So it just, even saying, as we try to get into his character, saying something like that seems, I can feel like Dr. Doom's going to yell at us. But you do want to understand it if you're going to create a story for the character. And, obviously he does a lot of very dark or big or even silly actions as he is portrayed as a villain in the Marvel comics over the many years since whatever, Fantastic Four number 4 or 5 or something in the early to mid 60s. But as you're going to make if you want to do something new with him, which I think is the only way you could get a real story to pop through, even with movies coming out. I think they would just use him in the mainline comics. But if you did a secondary one, obviously they'd probably flood the zone with Doctor Doom stories. So if you have a unique one, I think they'd grab it. And that's certainly the pitch I think we should pursue today. So I think something that's always interested me in Doctor Doom is just the fact that he is the ruler of a country. And, he apparently, I guess, eventually overthrew the Baron. And, he went to the States and met Reed Richards, and there's a rivalry there because Reed insults Dr. Doom's intelligence. And I just watched Oppenheimer, and this is a little bit like the sort of Amadeus Salieri plotline in Oppenheimer between Strauss and Oppenheimer. But Doctor Doom, then he travels the world and he creates his armor, and I believe he tries to save his mom at one point, and the machine he uses, the magic / technological machine he uses to go to Hades to save his mother, it explodes as Mephisto laughs at him, and that's what gives him his initial scar. Later on in one of the John Byrne arcs, the backstory is that when he finally put on his armor, which is, I guess, has a spell on it to protect him from, I don't know, his thoughts being invaded by Mephisto or something, that it burns his face, and then it, etc. I've always thought that the idea that this is a person obsessed with status, and that requires perfection. You have to be better than others, more powerful, wealthier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea that he just has, that there's just a scratch on the Mona Lisa. There's a perfect vase with just a crack, that he just had a V-A-S-E, vase, and that his face just has a scratch. That, to me, for one, if he burned his face with his armor, you think it could heal it, even though I guess there's a spell on it, so magic and that, maybe not. But, a spell he made, you feel like he could fix at some point. And there are times where it is fixed and not fixed in the comics. But to me, it's always most interesting to me if it's just a scratch. Also, there's a whole sort of thing, if he is if he really does have a burned face completely, I don't know. It speaks to that thing of that trope of just, monsters are bad, etc. And I think we're sort of beyond that. Or even if we're not beyond that as a society or a culture, which we probably are, I think we are beyond it simply out of narrative necessity. I don't think it's interesting. I think it's more interesting if it's just a scratch. That's maddening. One slight imperfection on his face, what he always looks at. One slight, a pimple you can never get rid of, etc. We all probably have a thing on our face, like an asymmetry or something that, you have to accept, and he cannot, because he has to be better than others, because not being better than others, the Baron vis-a-vis his father, the devil himself vis-a-vis his mother, then he can't, he'll never feel safe in the world, and he can't attain what he wants. And he has a general desire to save his mother's soul, which he may or may not have achieved, I guess, with Doctor Strange at one point in a trip to Hades. But he does seem so obsessed with his own insecurities that, I don't know, there's some bit about he tries to save his mother every year, etc., on the day of her death or soul binding. But, he seems his flaws, of course, that he's most obsessed with himself. He's reminiscent of Magneto, where he has this tragic backstory of persecution and then goes too far with it. Magneto, of course, is persecuted for his Jewish heritage, and then ends up wanting to protect mutants from persecution, but doing so in a way that is like those who persecuted his Jewish heritage, where he wants to basically persecute humanity or defend mutants so strongly that he would essentially be persecuting humanity, becoming the thing that he hates, which is the dramatic irony at the core of Magneto. And, generally with him also, does he really want to save, or does he want revenge? And is he just getting his revenge while telling himself he's saving people, lying to himself? And so Dr. Doom, is he really trying to save his mother when he researches dark magic? Is he really trying to, protect, not his father, but, gain the power and the strength he would need when he makes the armor for himself? A little bit reminiscent of how he had an armor of ice as his father froze around him. Is he really doing those things? Or is it for himself? Does he just have a flaw within him, an insecurity, an inability to be lesser than, because he cannot accept his failures? Much like the scar on his face. He cannot accept it, and it sort of unravels him. And for whatever reason, he cannot... I've known people who... see a lot of people oftentimes who, whether through... They can use flaws, like anger, or maybe I'm not saying this properly, but they can use flaws like anger or anxiety or other things to sort of be an emotional release valve, or it's sort of where they feel safe. And maybe I'm too far afield, but you can tell, like, they're sort of bottled up or trying to, be good and all that. And then when there's too much, almost, like a steam engine's, what is it, like a chimney? Blanking on the essential parts of a locomotive. Anyway, the pressure releases through whatever their means of release is. Some people might, resort to alcohol. Some people might, resort to anger. Some might resort to a sort of a more sad or depressive-like state. Maybe not clinically, But, this can be flaws that, with treatment or attention can be fixed if you're willing to face it. You do have to, and again, Dr. Doom has a scar on his face. If he can literally look himself in the face and face his flaws, that he isn't the best. But that's okay. You can be safe and fine and live a decent life and contribute, even if you're not the best, even if the devil is more powerful than you, or Reed Richards is smarter than you, etc. Mr. Fantastic is smarter than you. If you can handle that, you can be fine. But he can't, and that's his tragic flaw, at least in my estimation. But I will say that the thing that I always find interesting about Dr. Doom is the fact that, he rules a nation. And, I don't know how much comics want to get into that a lot of times, because you get into sort of policy areas, which, are parallel to political areas, and you can get into hot button topics, or it's just like, hey, that's boring. I don't want to read that comic. But I do think it's interesting from a character perspective. If for whatever reason Dr. Doom finds himself in, let's say, our story, in an area where, he's not doing the things we talked about he'd probably be doing in a run-up to, like, an appearance in films. Big, bad villainy, right? And if he's not doing big, bad villainy, and I find the fact that he runs the country interesting, then you want to keep him from doing big, bad villainy. For whatever reason, he's unable to do that at the time. He's working on plots. His plots have failed. He's not discouraged, but he is. But he's telling himself that he's working on more complicated plots. He's up in his game. He's taken it to the next level. It's just taken longer to develop these plots and machinations and technologies and magics for his next great, awful, world-threatening endeavor. So he's at home in Latveria, and he's, pacing around, walking around the country, trying to clear his head and focus on his grand designs. And if you want him involved in his country, he's got to be, drawn into it. Because he clearly, I think, is probably disinterested in it. He's got those, like, Doombot robots of his. There's probably, like, a Doombot mayor, like a Doombot city council. They're probably running the whole place. It's like President Doombot. It's like, Dr. Doom, we got a problem with, like, the water drainage system. He's like, just talk to President Doombot. That's not my thing. I don't do that. Speak to your local Doombot. So what would draw him in? I think a similar situation to, this is where I think his origin would be useful. If you had sort of a mother and maybe like a daughter, because he has an interesting relationship with Reed and Sue Richards' daughter, Valeria, who's named after, I can't remember, but he did pick the name. I don't think his mother is named Valeria, or is she named? I don't know. Anyway, it's an important name to him. And he, in theory, I guess, on the Human Torch's asking, helps deliver Valeria Richards, because there was like a trouble with the birth. And the idea of Dr. Doom delivering a baby is, by the way, an incredible story. And I would certainly take that as inspiration for doing something different with the character. And he's interesting enough to do different stuff with. But then, after delivering the baby, he said, as payment or whatever, I get to pick the name, and it's Valeria. So he's got an interesting relationship with her, and throughout the comics, that character is very Machiavellian and brilliant, similar to Dr. Doom. She seems in many ways like Dr. Doom's daughter, more so than, I think she calls him uncle, more so than Reed and Sue's. Though, there's an elements of as a practicality to Sue, and obviously a big-brained element and intelligence to Reed that combined into Valeria would seem Doom-like. Anyway, if Doom encountered like a mother and daughter, citizens of his who were under threat for some reason, reminiscent of how his, mother and he himself and his family were under threat from the Baron persecuting the Romani's, forces and etc. He could, be kind of brought into a story involving them and involving their life and their more prosaic and practical day-to-day life. And, given a strong enough character that doesn't just doesn't want too much help, right? People have pride, or they don't want to be brought. Maybe this woman would just be wary of Dr. Doom's life and world, knowing what he's like. I don't know how much propaganda there is in Latveria, but I'm guessing word gets out to some degree. So, if this person is reluctant to take his help, and so he assists in more modest ways, or even almost assists as he's essentially just trying to walk around and clear his head anyway, he could literally assist, bringing them back home and fixing the lock on their door or something, or very simple stuff, fixing their fence and its gate, and which is literally building a home with this woman, to sort of build on the symbology or the symbolism of doing the same. And slowly, as he takes these walking by, maybe bumps into her again and her daughter again a week later, and then he starts, swinging by as he's out trying to work on his grand evil designs. And I think the interesting thing is to show him through this, single-parent family getting involved in their experience in his country, Are they taken advantage of in the markets? Is the child being educated well? Just simple things like the roads and the bridges and stuff, and how's the traffic in Latveria? Now this starts to get into the threat of like a sort of more country-focused story of like, hey, this is boring. Dr. Doom, studies traffic lights. It should be green longer. I love green. It's just like my cloak. Anyway, but I think where you want to take it is he starts to see value in the people of his country, and he starts to see value in helping them. And, they have their issues, and they can have certain border issues and stuff, which his first instinct would be like, attack, conquer, destroy, whatever, glory to Doom, or whatever he would say. But they may say like, no, we live on the borders with these countries and, that are beside us, and we have trade and we have relationships and we have certain issues and problems. We don't want to attack them. We want to solve this issue. We want to reason it out. We want it to be fair. We want to, these people are, our friends or whatever, but, they have differences in their countries and et cetera, et cetera. And so Dr. Doom, who may have, his Romani differences from his backstory, may lead him towards revenge, especially given his experiences, now has to do something different. And again, that's interesting. How does Dr. Doom solve like a border dispute or a trade dispute, and how does he do it fairly? Because he's probably going to do it still with a rather interesting way, or even if it's just with the process or the discussion of it. He'll start out being Dr. Doom, right? Incredibly demanding and imperious, and you'll do what I say. And, that doesn't work. And for whatever reason, he's, through the attachment he has to this, single mother and her child, he wants it to work. And, he has to actually find ways to learn what humility is and be humble, even though he might do it sort of like a logical Vulcan or something. He might do it, just for the exercise of it to understand it, because he thinks it makes him a better manipulator or something. Maybe that's how he rationalizes it to himself as he actually does it. Why he's doing these things and what the purpose is in the end to his character. Are they fueling his grand evil designs? Is that how he rationalizes taking time with them? Or are they actually helping heal his soul a little bit? You could show a scene every morning where he looks in the mirror and he looks at that scar, and then he, dons his armor. You could, of course, show him wearing the armor less around the woman and her daughter. And sorry to just call her the woman. I guess we come with a name, but we're pretty deep in on the woman. Dr. Doom, the man. But as the time goes on and as he actually helps people, again, rationalizing it's for his own evil designs or his own evil sort of like exercise and skill building. As he goes on, he can look in the mirror each morning and not focus on the scar. And that would be an interesting, visualization of his changing character in this moment. I do think in the end, obviously, he's going to end up being Dr. Doom. And, he has to be. These characters must remain themselves. And he's not really interesting when he stops being himself. But I do think that he, would enter into some sort of courtship or romantic relationship with this woman and some sort of parental father figure relationship with the daughter. And the daughter can be bright, but normal bright. And she can remind him of Valeria, but, not truly. Valeria is like a super genius. Valeria Richards. And, but because this isn't, Valeria Richards is a complicated thing for him, because he also seems, Valeria Richards sort of seems like his daughter, and I think sometimes he seems to have an attraction to Sue Richards, Valeria's mother, and all that stuff. And there's certainly a thing going on here which is reminiscent of that, which is played up a lot in the Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars story from, I don't know, at this point, maybe 10 years ago. So, there's an echo of that there. But I think in the end, but that's also an element of it. He would want Sue Storm and Valeria Richards. That's what he would want. Not just because it would one-up Reed Richards and, be a status thing, which, goes to, again, his tragic flaw, but also because, they're the thing he wants. And so settling for this Latvian woman and her daughter, who may also be of sterling character and intelligent and interesting people, they're not, in his mind, the best. They're not Sue and Valeria, and that would eat at him. And as well, being the king of Latveria doesn't interest him. He wants to rule the world, the universe, whatever. He seems to seemingly want to be a god, in theory to maybe defeat Mephisto, and in theory to do that not as revenge, but to free his mother's soul, maybe. But in the end, obviously, it's not that. It's to for his own self-aggrandizement, for his own power, for his own, tragic flaw of, having to be better than others. So in the end, he's probably going to, he's certainly not going to stay with the woman and her child. And he probably, I guess we brought up the Doombots earlier. There'd probably be a scene where it's revealed that, they're together, him and the Latvian woman, and then you see him outside, and you learn that it's a Doombot that is now her husband and the father of this child. And it could certainly be one that he looks up, it checks in on and has, made very convincing. But in the end, I think you return to this continuing motif of the mirror, and the final shots are him waking up the next day, looking out maybe the window on the road to her house, turning away from it, and staring at the mirror and looking at nothing else but the scar on his face. And he dons the mask and he's Dr. Doom again. And yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff you could play with there. I think in the, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones books, part of the long list of titles or superlatives for the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms is something like Savior of the Realm. And I like that as an idea for a title for this, like Dr. Doom, Savior of the Realm. It sounds like a fun, sort of off-the-wall title where you'd be like, wait, what? And it certainly make you intrigued to check it out. But anyway, I think that would be a fun story for Dr. Doom to actually focus on his country. There's a lot of interesting things there, and he's an interesting character to have focus on things because he has the backstory pulls him in different ways. His mix of different elements, technology and magic. How would he solve certain problems in his country through, strange magics or wild technologies. And he also is a character with a sense of honor and a sense of loyalty, even, strangely enough, at times. And that's, of course, absolutely fascinating. It's all the way back to the Westerns. It's the anti-hero with a code. Not that Dr. Doom is an anti-hero, though he would essentially be one in this story. But someone who is torn between their flaws and their whatever selfish needs for themselves, but a code that makes them challenge that and conflicts with that and, break out of their selfishness to do something good for others is obviously a tale as old as time and very interesting, and one that befits the sort of evil medieval sorcerer king that Dr. Doom is. So, yeah, that sounds fun. I'm online as Throwaway Lines. I hope you had a fun time coming up with this Dr. Doom story, and see you next week. A tremendous week, and I'm trying to think of a Dr. Doom joke. Quick. I don't know. Dr. Doom is... Yeah, there we go.